As Obiora and his bodyguard entered the room carrying an unconscious Adanna, the flickering candlelight cast an eerie glow upon the occultic red ribbons and white fabric that adorned the walls of the private hut. This was no ordinary chamber. It was a sacred space where Obiora renewed his power and wealth every 7th market day. Unbeknownst to Adanna, Obiora had been possessed by a serpent goddess he encountered during his quest for riches, initiated by a friend from another village. Obiora, now a man with a dark secret, transformed into a snake whenever he desired to lay with his wives. The private hut, housing the heart and presence of the serpent goddess, was the only place where this twisted ritual could occur. As they laid Adanna down on the floor, Obiora turned to his brainwashed guard and nodded. "Leave us," he commanded. "I wish to spend quality time with my wife." The guard, his conscience long ago bought with Obiora's money, bowed and exited the hut without question. Once alone, Obiora began his transformation, his human form giving way to scales and slithering coils. He approached Adanna, invoking incantations as he took from her what he believed was rightfully his. The serpent goddess's power flowed through him, renewing his wealth and influence with each wicked act. Hours later, Obiora called for his guard to return. Together, they carried Adanna back to her chambers, leaving her on her bed as if nothing had transpired. The next morning, Adanna awoke with a start, her body aching and her mind hazy. As she sat up, she noticed the unsettling sensation of something moving within her stomach. Confused and frightened, she looked down at her clothing, realizing she now wore a white garment instead of what she had gone to sleep in. Memories of the woman in white being carried out of the private mud hut flooded back to her, and a sense of dread filled her heart. "What happened to me last night?" she whispered, her voice trembling. Determined to confront her husband, Adanna rushed out of her room, her eyes searching for Obiora. She found him in his usual spot, calmly sipping on palm wine as if all was right in the world. "Obiora!" she cried out, her voice laced with fear and anger. "What have you done to me? Why am I wearing this white dress?" Obiora looked up at her, his expression unreadable. "My dear Adanna," he said, his tone condescending, "I was merely spending time with my wife. White is my favorite color, and I prefer you to wear it when we are together." Adanna's eyes widened in disbelief. "What do you mean? And why do I feel pain and movement in my stomach?" Obiora's face hardened, and he rose to his feet. "Silence," he commanded. "I have paid your bride price and provided for you. I will decide what happens to you." Tears streamed down Adanna's face as she fell to her knees. "Please, Obiora," she begged, "let me go home. Return whatever you have paid to my mother and free me from this nightmare." But Obiora remained unmoved. "I married you out of love, Adanna. You are my wife, and there is no going back." Devastated and hopeless, Adanna fled back to her chambers, collapsing onto her bed in a fit of sobs. She cursed her mother for pushing her into this marriage and blamed herself for not listening to her heart. As she lay there, feeling utterly alone and shattered, her mind raced with thoughts of escape. But even in her despair, Adanna knew that leaving the compound would be nearly impossible. Obiora's bodyguards were everywhere, watching her every move. She was trapped in a living nightmare with no way out and no one to turn to. Through her tears, Adanna whispered a desperate prayer. "Please, gods, hear my plea. Deliver me from this hell and guide me back to the life I once knew." But as the words left her lips, Adanna couldn't help but wonder if anyone, even the gods themselves, could save her from the twisted web of dark magic and betrayal she had become ensnared in. In the village, Adanna's mother, Adanna, was relishing her newfound wealth and status. She attended every occasion, flaunting her expensive clothes and jewelry, and mingled with the rich women she had once envied. Adanna basked in the attention and admiration she received, her heart swelling with pride at her elevated position in society. However, amidst the glitz and glamour, Adanna had forgotten the dangers she had exposed her daughter to. She remained blissfully unaware of the nightmare Adanna was enduring in Obiora's house, instead choosing to believe that her daughter was enjoying a life of luxury and happiness. "Adanna must be so content with her wealthy husband," Adanna would say to her new friends, a smug smile on her face. "She has everything she could ever want now." But while Adanna reveled in her delusions, Adanna was suffering terribly under Obiora's cruel hand. Meanwhile, Ikenna, Adanna's true love, was haunted by thoughts of her. Ever since she had been married off to Obiora, Ikenna had been unable to find peace. His mind constantly drifted to Adanna, wondering if she was truly happy in her new life. One night, as Ikenna lay sleeping, a terrifying dream plagued his mind. He saw Adanna, bound by ropes, being thrown into a raging river. Ikenna desperately tried to save her, but no matter how hard he swam, he couldn't reach her. He woke up in a cold sweat, his heart racing and his mind reeling. As he sat outside his hut, trying to make sense of the dream, Ikenna found himself torn. Part of him believed that Adanna was in danger, that something was very wrong in Obiora's house. But another part of him urged him to move on, to focus on his own future and leave the past behind. Lost in thought, Ikenna barely noticed when his father approached him. "Ikenna, my son," his father called out. But Ikenna remained unresponsive, his mind far away. Concerned, Ikenna's father reached out and tapped him on the shoulder. Startled, Ikenna blurted out, "Adanna is not fine. She needs me." His father, taken aback by the outburst, tried to calm him down. "Ikenna, you must forget about her. She is a married woman now, and you need to focus on your own goals in life." Ikenna shook his head vehemently. "No, father, I can feel it in my heart. Adanna is suffering in that house. Something is very wrong." But his father remained firm. "If she truly loved you, she would have fought for your love. She would never have allowed herself to be persuaded to marry an old man for money." The words struck Ikenna like a blow to the chest. As much as he wanted to deny it, a part of him knew his father was right. If Adanna had loved him as much as he loved her, she would have run away with him, consequences be damned. With a heavy heart, Ikenna made the decision to try and move on with his life. He threw himself into his work, determined to become the best potter in the village. But even as he shaped the clay beneath his hands, he couldn't help but wonder if he was making the right choice. Days turned into weeks, and weeks into months. Ikenna's life fell into a routine of work and sleep, but the ache in his heart never truly faded. He would often find himself staring off into the distance, wondering if Adanna was thinking of him too. One evening, as Ikenna sat alone by the river, he whispered a prayer to the gods. "Please, watch over Adanna. Keep her safe, and if it is meant to be, bring her back to me." He released a handful of petals into the water, watching as they drifted away on the current. With a sigh, Ikenna stood up and made his way back to the village, unaware that fate had a different plan in store for him and Adanna. 6 months had passed since Adanna became trapped in Obiora's house, locked in a living nightmare. Every 7th market day, Obiora would slip a mysterious substance into her food and drink, rendering her unconscious and vulnerable to his dark rituals in the private hut. Adanna had been desperately searching for a way out, but her efforts were in vain, as Obiora's bodyguards kept a watchful eye on her every move. One day, as the 7th market day approached once more, Adanna's mind raced with questions. What was happening to her every week? Why did she always feel something moving inside her stomach? And why did she always wake up wearing a white garment? Suddenly, a realization dawned on her. Every time she consumed the special meal and palm wine Obiora prepared for her, she would fall into a deep, unnatural sleep. Determined to uncover the truth, Adanna made a resolute decision. She would not eat or drink anything Obiora offered her that day. Instead, she would secretly dispose of the food and drink, pretending to have consumed them, so that she could remain awake and alert. As evening fell, Obiora entered Adanna's chambers, a tray of her favorite meal and palm wine in hand. He was unusually kind and attentive, showering her with compliments and affection. Adanna, knowing this was all part of his deception, played along, masking her true intentions behind a facade of contentment. "My dear Adanna," Obiora said, his voice dripping with false sweetness, "I have prepared your favorite dish and the finest palm wine. Please eat and drink to your heart's content." Adanna forced a smile, accepting the tray graciously. "Thank you, my husband. You are too kind." As Obiora left her chambers, Adanna quickly set her plan into motion. She pretended to eat the food, occasionally bringing the spoon to her mouth while surreptitiously discarding the contents into a hidden plate. Similarly, she poured the palm wine into a cup, ensuring that the plate and cup were visible to give the illusion that she had consumed everything. With her heart pounding in her chest, Adanna lay down on her bed, feigning deep sleep. She even added a few convincing snores for good measure. Hours passed, and the sound of footsteps echoed in her chambers. Obiora entered, approaching her sleeping form cautiously. He ran his fingers over her face, checking to ensure she was truly unconscious. Satisfied, Obiora left the room, only to return moments later with a white garment in hand. He swiftly changed Adanna's clothing, all the while muttering sinister incantations under his breath. Adanna fought the urge to react, maintaining her facade of slumber. "Guard," Obiora called out, summoning one of his loyal men. "Take her to the private hut. It is time." Adanna's heart raced as she felt the guard's strong arms lift her from the bed. She wanted to scream, to open her eyes and confront Obiora, but she knew she had to remain still and uncover the truth behind the forbidden room. The guard carried Adanna to the private hut and laid her down on the cold, hard ground before leaving her alone in the eerie silence. As Adanna cautiously opened her eyes, she found herself surrounded by occultic red ribbons and symbols adorning the walls. The room pulsed with an unseen energy, making her skin crawl. But what shocked Adanna the most was the sight of 8 heavily pregnant women lying unconscious on the floor. With a sickening realization, she understood that these were Obiora's other wives, the ones he had claimed were living in separate quarters. Suddenly, the sound of slithering filled the room, and a massive white python emerged from the shadows. Adanna watched in horror as the serpent began to crawl over the sleeping women, one by one, its scales glistening in the dim light. When the python reached Adanna, it paused, flicking its tongue over her skin as if tasting her scent. For a moment, Adanna feared the worst, but to her surprise, the snake simply turned and slithered out of the hut. As the guards returned to take the women back to their respective chambers, Adanna's mind reeled with the realization of what had been happening to her all this time. The python, Obiora's true form, had been violating her and the other wives every 7th market day, using dark magic to impregnate them and sustain his wealth and power. Back in her own chamber, Adanna collapsed onto her bed, sobbing uncontrollably. She felt violated, betrayed, and utterly helpless. The gravity of her situation weighed heavily upon her, and she knew she had to find a way out, no matter the cost. Adanna's thoughts turned to Ikenna, her true love, and the life she could have had with him. Regret consumed her as she realized the foolishness of succumbing to her mother's pressure and marrying Obiora. If only she had listened to her heart and run away with Ikenna, she wouldn't be trapped in this living hell. As Adanna lay her head on her pillow, she noticed a strange movement beneath it. With trembling hands, she lifted the pillow, only to discover a horrifying sight. The palm wine she had poured into the cup and hidden had transformed into a grotesque, half-human, half-snake creature. Its white, scaly skin glistened in the candlelight, and its eyes fixated on her with an unsettling intensity. Adanna fought back a scream, realizing that this abomination was what she had been consuming all along. No wonder she had felt something writhing inside her stomach, growing stronger with each passing day. The creature vanished in the blink of an eye, leaving Adanna shaking and horrified. Falling to her knees, Adanna wept bitter tears, cursing her own naivety and the twisted fate that had befallen her. She prayed fervently to the gods, begging for their intervention and guidance. But as the days turned into weeks and the weeks into months, Adanna's hope began to wane, replaced by a grim determination to survive and escape this nightmare. Every 7th market day, the cycle repeated itself, with Obiora giving her dark magic substance Adanna and subjecting her to his vile rituals. But now, armed with the knowledge of his true nature, Adanna's resolve only grew stronger. She would not let Obiora break her spirit, no matter how much pain and suffering she had to endure. In the depths of her despair, Adanna clung to the faint hope that somehow, someday, she would find a way to break free from Obiora's clutches and reclaim her life. She whispered prayers to the gods, pleading for strength, courage, and the opportunity to escape. And though the path ahead seemed dark and uncertain, Adanna refused to give up. For she knew that her survival depended on her unwavering determination to fight for her freedom and the life she truly deserved. A month had passed since Adanna's shocking discovery in the private hut, and she began to notice changes in her body. The signs of pregnancy were unmistakable, but Adanna was filled with doubt and confusion. She hadn't been intimate with her husband Obiora, so how could she possibly be pregnant? Adanna decided to keep her suspicions to herself, pretending that everything was normal while secretly searching for a way out of her nightmarish situation. She needed time to process this new development and gather the courage to confront Obiora about the pregnancy. 2 months later, Adanna's stomach had swollen, making her condition impossible to hide. One day, as Obiora sat outside their home, Adanna approached him, determined to get answers. "Obiora," she said, her voice trembling slightly, "I need to talk to you about something important." Obiora looked up at her, his expression unreadable. "What is it, my dear wife?" Adanna took a deep breath, steeling herself for the conversation ahead. "I'm pregnant, Obiora. But I don't understand how this is possible. We haven't been together in that way. How did this happen?" To her surprise, Obiora simply laughed, a cruel, mocking sound that sent shivers down her spine. "Adanna, you are my wife," he said, his voice dripping with condescension. "I have paid for everything, including you. I am free to do as I please with you." Adanna's eyes widened in shock and disgust. "But how? How did you get me pregnant without my knowledge or consent?" Obiora's face hardened, and he stood up, towering over her. "Enough questions, Adanna. You are carrying my child, and that is all that matters." Tears streaming down her face, Adanna turned and ran back into the house, her heart heavy with the realization of the true depth of Obiora's betrayal. She cried bitterly, her mind flashing back to the strange substances he had been giving her, the mysterious drinks she had been consuming. As the months passed, Adanna's pregnancy progressed, her stomach growing larger with each passing day. By the 6th month, she looked as if she was ready to give birth at any moment. Adanna suffered in silence, her once vibrant spirit slowly crumbling under the weight of her despair. 9 months came and went, and Adanna began to hope that the birth of her child would provide her with an opportunity to escape. She firmly believed that if she could just make it to the delivery room, she would find a way to flee and never return to Obiora's house. But as the days turned into weeks and the weeks into months, Adanna realized that something was terribly wrong. 11 months had passed, and still there was no sign of labor, no indication that her child was ready to be born. Adanna's worry and fear consumed her, and she spent countless hours crying, praying for a miracle. A year had now gone by, and Adanna's pregnancy showed no signs of ending. She was trapped, both physically and emotionally, in a nightmare that seemed to have no escape. Obiora's bodyguards watched her every move, thwarting any attempt she made to flee. In the village, Adanna's mother, Adanna, found herself growing increasingly worried about her daughter. It had been months since she had last seen Adanna, and although a part of her believed that her daughter was living a life of luxury and happiness with her wealthy husband Obiora, a nagging sense of unease persisted in the back of her mind. One day, unable to ignore her concerns any longer, Adanna made the decision to visit Adanna. She dressed in her finest clothes, hoping to make a good impression on her son-in-law and his household. As Adanna approached Obiora's compound, she was surprised to find the gates firmly shut, guarded by stern-faced men. She called out to them, requesting entry to see her daughter. "I'm sorry, madam," one of the guards replied, his tone cold and unwavering. "No one is allowed to enter without the express permission of our boss, Obiora." Adanna's heart sank, but she refused to be deterred. She argued with the guards, insisting that she had every right to see her own daughter. The commotion drew the attention of Obiora himself, who emerged from the compound to address the situation. Upon seeing Adanna, Obiora's face hardened, his eyes narrowing with displeasure. "Adanna," he said, his voice thick with irritation, "I must ask you to refrain from coming here to see Adanna. She is perfectly fine and well cared for. When the time is right, I will bring her to the village myself." Adanna opened her mouth to protest, but Obiora cut her off with a dismissive wave of his hand. Your daughter will return to you soon enough. Until then, I suggest you focus on your own affairs and trust that I am taking excellent care of her." With those words, Obiora turned and retreated back into the compound, leaving Adanna standing at the gates, confused and heartbroken. She made her way home, her mind racing with questions and concerns. Upon her return, Adanna shared the troubling encounter with her husband, Nnamdi. Nnamdi's anger flared as he listened to his wife's account, his frustration with her self-interest and the situation they had forced upon their daughter boiling over. "Adanna," Nnamdi exclaimed, his voice filled with exasperation. "Can't you see what your greed has done? You pushed our daughter into a marriage she didn't want, all for the sake of wealth and status. And now, look at what has happened. We can't even see her, and you're still clinging to the delusion that she's happy." Adanna's eyes filled with tears as she tried to defend herself. "I only wanted the best for her, Nnamdi. I thought Obiora could provide her with the life we never had." Nnamdi shook his head, his disappointment evident. "The best for her or the best for you? You were blinded by your own desires, Adanna, and now our daughter is paying the price." The couple argued back and forth, their voices rising with each accusation and counter-accusation. The rift between them grew wider, fueled by the guilt and regret that now plagued their hearts. Meanwhile, in Obiora's compound, Adanna remained trapped in her own personal hell. She spent her days crying and praying, begging the ancestors to rescue her from the nightmare she found herself in. One fateful day, a minor disaster struck Obiora's household. A kitchen stand collapsed, sending all the cooking pots tumbling to the ground, shattering upon impact. Obiora, furious at the inconvenience, decided to purchase new pots to replace the broken ones. As it happened, the shop Obiora chose to visit belonged to Ikenna's master. Ikenna, who had been working hard to move on from the heartbreak of losing Adanna, was shocked to see Obiora enter the store. He recognized the man instantly, though Obiora showed no sign of knowing who Ikenna was. Obiora proceeded to purchase a large number of pots, instructing Ikenna's master to have them delivered to his house. Ikenna's master, sensing an opportunity for his apprentice to prove himself, tasked Ikenna with the delivery. As Ikenna entered Obiora's compound, he was struck by the eerie stillness that hung in the air. The once grand house, with its numerous mud huts, now felt like a graveyard, devoid of life and laughter. Ikenna couldn't help but wonder where Adanna was and what had become of Obiora's other wives. Pushing aside his curiosity, Ikenna focused on his task, carrying the pots one by one to the designated kitchen area. Unbeknownst to him, Adanna had caught sight of him through her window, her heart leaping with a mix of joy and desperation. As Ikenna passed by Adanna's window with the second pot, she couldn't contain herself any longer. Keeping her voice low to avoid drawing Obiora's attention, she called out to him, "Ikenna! Ikenna, it's me! Adanna!" Ikenna froze, the sound of Adanna's voice sending a jolt through his body. For a moment, he considered ignoring her, the pain of her betrayal still fresh in his heart. But something in her tone, a desperate plea that he couldn't ignore, compelled him to turn back. "Adanna," he whispered, approaching her window cautiously. "What's going on? Are you all right?" Tears streamed down Adanna's face as she shook her head. "No, Ikenna, I'm not all right. I'm dying here. Obiora, he's not what he seems. He's done terrible things to me, to all of us." Ikenna's eyes widened, a mix of horror and concern etched on his face. "What do you mean? What has he done?" Adanna glanced over her shoulder, fear gripping her heart. "I can't explain everything now, but please, Ikenna, you have to help me. I need to get out of here before it's too late." Ikenna nodded, his resolve strengthening with each passing second. "I'll find a way, Adanna. I won't let him hurt you anymore. I promise." Just as Ikenna was about to inquire further, the sound of approaching footsteps sent a chill down their spines. Obiora, sensing something amiss, was heading straight towards them. "Go, Ikenna," Adanna urged, her voice filled with panic. "If he sees us together, he'll kill us both. Please just go and find a way to save me." With a heavy heart, Ikenna quickly retreated, slipping away to retrieve the third pot as Obiora rounded the corner. Adanna, her heart racing, composed herself, praying that Obiora would not suspect anything. As Ikenna made his way back to his master's shop, his mind raced with the newfound knowledge of Adanna's suffering. He knew he couldn't abandon her, not again. He would find a way to rescue her, no matter the cost. Ikenna raced back to his master's shop, his heart pounding with a newfound sense of urgency. As soon as he arrived, he sought out his master, desperate to share the shocking discovery he had made at Obiora's compound. "Master," Ikenna exclaimed, his voice trembling with emotion, "I need to talk to you about something important. It's about Adanna and the other women in Obiora's house." His master, initially dismissive, tried to steer Ikenna back to his duties. "Ikenna, my boy, you should focus on the work you were sent to do. Delivering those pots is your responsibility." But Ikenna persisted, his eyes filled with determination. "Please, master, hear me out. Adanna and the other wives are being held captive by Obiora. They're suffering, and I can't just stand by and do nothing." Seeing the sincerity and desperation in Ikenna's face, his master's expression softened. "Tell me everything, Ikenna. What did you see?" Ikenna recounted the eerie atmosphere of Obiora's compound, the haunting absence of life, and Adanna's desperate plea for help. As he spoke, his master's eyes widened with growing concern. "Master, I beg you," Ikenna implored, "please give me a chance to help them. I can't finish delivering the pots, knowing that Adanna and the others are trapped in that nightmare." After a moment of contemplation, his master nodded slowly. "All right, Ikenna. I can see that this means a great deal to you. Go, do what you must to rescue them. But be careful, my boy. Obiora is a dangerous man." Ikenna's face lit up with gratitude. "Thank you, master. I won't let you down." He paused, a thought occurring to him. "If Obiora comes looking for his pots, could you please tell him that I'll bring them myself? I need an excuse to return to the compound." His master agreed, understanding the importance of Ikenna's mission. "I will, Ikenna. But first, you should go see Adanna's parents. They deserve to know what's happening to their daughter." With a nod of determination, Ikenna set out for Adanna's family home. When he arrived, he found Adanna's father and brother, their faces etched with worry. Adanna's mother, he learned, had gone out. "Sir," Ikenna began, his voice filled with urgency, "I have important news about Adanna. I saw her today at Obiora's house, and she's in danger." Adanna's father's eyes widened, a glimmer of hope mixed with fear. "What do you mean, Ikenna? What's happening to my daughter?" Ikenna revealed the dark secrets he had uncovered, the suffering Adanna and the other wives endured under Obiora's cruel hand. He told them of his plan to rescue her, to bring her back to the family she loved. Tears welled up in Adanna's father's eyes as he listened, his heart breaking for his beloved child. "I knew something was wrong," he whispered, his voice hoarse with emotion. "I've had dreams, terrible dreams about Adanna, and the rumors about Obiora's dark deeds." He looked at Ikenna, a newfound respect and gratitude in his gaze. "Ikenna, my boy, if you can save my daughter, I will be forever in your debt. Please, I won't rest until Adanna is safe. But I need your help, your support to make this happen." Adanna's father's face lit up with renewed hope upon hearing Ikenna's plan. "Ikenna, my boy," he said, his voice filled with determination, "I have been seeking a way to help my daughter, and I believe the answer lies with a renowned chief priest in the next village. It is said that he possesses the knowledge to break the dark magic that plagues our land." Without hesitation, Ikenna and Adanna's father set out on the long journey to the chief priest's abode. The path was arduous and lonely, but their shared purpose fueled their steps, propelling them forward. As they approached the priest's dwelling, they found him sitting outside, his eyes fixed upon them as if he had been expecting their arrival. The chief priest's voice rang out, strong and clear, "I know the reason for your visit, my sons. The calamity that has befallen your village weighs heavily on my heart, and I have long sought a means to put an end to it." He beckoned them closer, reaching into his robes to retrieve a small pouch. "Ikenna," he said, pressing the pouch into the young man's hands, "before you deliver the final pot to Obiora, you must wash it with the substance contained within this pouch. Ensure that the pot is thoroughly dried before you make the delivery. This act will set in motion the events that will bring about Obiora's downfall." Ikenna's eyes widened, questions burning on his tongue, but the chief priest silenced him with a raised hand. Do not question the ways of the spirits, my son. I see beyond what mortal eyes can perceive, and I assure you that this is the path to ending Obiora's reign of terror. Now go, and remember that the pot must be delivered today." With newfound purpose, Ikenna and Adanna's father bid the chief priest farewell and hastened back to the village. Time was of the essence, and they wasted none of it. Upon reaching Ikenna's master's shop, they immediately set about washing the pot with the mystical substance, their hands trembling with anticipation. As the sun began to dip below the horizon, the pot lay drying in its warm rays. Ikenna and his master carefully loaded the 2 remaining pots, leaving Adanna's father behind to avoid arousing suspicion. They made their way to Obiora's compound, their hearts pounding in their chests. At the gates, the guards barred their entry, insisting that the hour was too late for deliveries. Ikenna, remembering the chief priest's warning, raised his voice. "I cannot return tomorrow, for this is the only chance I have to complete the delivery. The pots must be in Obiora's hands today." The commotion drew Obiora's attention, and he appeared at his window, his gaze falling upon the familiar face of the potboy. With a wave of his hand, he instructed the guards to allow them entry. Ikenna and his master hurried inside, their feet carrying them swiftly to Obiora's chambers. As they set the pots down, Ikenna's heart raced, fear gripping him, as the thought of Obiora discovering his encounter with Adanna flashed through his mind. To their surprise, Obiora called out to them as they turned to leave. Ikenna froze, his body tensing in anticipation of the worst. But Obiora, in a rare display of generosity, pressed extra cowries into their hands, praising their honesty and dedication. Relieved and grateful, Ikenna and his master took their leave, the night gate closing behind them with a resounding thud. Ikenna's heart ached for Adanna. Ikenna and his master made their way back home, their hearts heavy with the weight of the task they had just completed. As they approached Ikenna's house, they saw Adanna's father already waiting for them, his face etched with a mixture of hope and anxiety. Upon seeing Ikenna and his master, Adanna's father rushed forward, his eyes searching their faces for any sign of his beloved daughter. "Did you bring her?" he asked, his voice trembling with emotion. "Is Adanna with you?" Ikenna placed a comforting hand on the older man's shoulder, his own heart aching with the knowledge that they had not yet succeeded in freeing Adanna from Obiora's clutches. "Not yet, father," he said softly, "but we have taken the first step towards her liberation. The chief priest has given us a substance that will bring about Obiora's downfall, and we have delivered it to him through the pot." Adanna's father's face fell, disappointment and frustration evident in his eyes. I hoped that the substance would have an immediate effect, that my daughter would be returned to me today." Ikenna's master stepped forward, his voice gentle but firm. "These things take time, my friend. The chief priest's magic is powerful, but it must work its way through Obiora's dark defenses. We must be patient and vigilant, keeping our ears to the ground for any news of what transpires within Obiora's compound." Adanna's father nodded slowly, the weight of their words sinking in. "I understand," he said, his voice heavy with resignation. "I just want my daughter back, safe and sound. The thought of her suffering in that monster's house, it tears me apart." Ikenna gripped the older man's hand, his own determination burning bright. "We will not rest until Adanna is free, father. You have my word. We will work together, day and night, to ensure that the chief priest's substance brings about the change we so desperately need." With a heavy heart, Adanna's father bid them farewell, returning to his own home to wait for any news of his daughter's fate. Ikenna and his master, too, retired for the night, their minds filled with thoughts of the brave young woman trapped in Obiora's web of darkness. 2 days passed since Ikenna and his master delivered the pots to Obiora's compound, and yet there seemed to be no change in the situation. Ikenna, growing increasingly anxious, found himself drawn to the outskirts of Obiora's house, desperately seeking any sign or whisper of what was transpiring within. Meanwhile, Adanna, trapped in her own personal hell, began to lose hope. As the days dragged on with no word from Ikenna, doubts and fears crept into her mind. "Has he forgotten me?" she whispered to herself, tears streaming down her face. "Has he abandoned me to this fate? The weight of her despair pressed down upon her, and she found herself spiraling into a pit of hopelessness. What if Obiora's guards have caught him, she thought, her heart clenching with fear. What if he's been hurt, or worse? Adanna spent her days in a constant state of worry and fear, her only solace the fervent prayers she whispered to the gods, begging for their intervention and for the strength to endure the nightmare that had become her life. 7 days later, on the day Obiora traditionally has to gather his wives in the private hut for his dark rituals in the night, something strange occurred. Obiora, unaware of the magic that had been set in motion, prepared a meal for his wives and himself, using the very pot Ikenna had washed with the chief priest's substance. He waited till the night that he normally lured them into the private hut. As the evening approached after cooking, he went to each of his wives' rooms, serving them the food he had prepared. When he reached Adanna's chambers, he brought her a portion of yam and palm wine. With his task complete, Obiora retired to his own chambers to dine alone. As he took a bite of the yam, savoring the taste on his tongue, he felt a strange sensation in his stomach, a movement that seemed out of place. Dismissing it as a minor discomfort, Obiora continued to eat. But within moments, a searing pain ripped through his body, and he let out an agonized scream. He fell to the floor, his body convulsing as he began to vomit a vile, white substance. "Who has done this to me?" he cried out, his voice filled with rage and fear. "What is happening to me?" Obiora's guards, hearing his cries, raced to his chambers, their hearts pounding with terror. They found their master collapsed on the floor, his body writhing in pain. They tried to help him, offering water and local herbs, but nothing seemed to ease his suffering. Adanna, hearing the commotion, gathered what little strength she had and made her way to Obiora's chambers. The sight that greeted her was one of pure horror. Obiora, the man who had tormented her for so long, lay half dead on the floor, his face contorted in agony. In that moment, Adanna saw her chance. She turned to the guards, her voice trembling with a mix of fear and determination. "We must take him to the chief priest," she said. "He is the only one who can help him now." The guards, desperate to save their master, agreed. They lifted Obiora onto a carrier, preparing to transport him to the chief priest's abode. Adanna, seizing the opportunity, insisted on accompanying them. As they made their way out of the compound, Obiora's body convulsed once more, and to the horror of all present, he vomited forth a living python. The guards, terror gripping their hearts, fled for their lives, leaving Adanna alone with the writhing serpent. Adanna, her pregnancy slowing her movements, ran as fast as she could, her heart pounding in her chest. She raced towards her father's compound, praying to the gods for strength and protection. When she finally reached her home, her father saw her and rushed to embrace her. "Adanna, my daughter!" he cried out, his voice filled with relief and concern. Adanna collapsed into his arms, tears streaming down her face. Her mother, hearing the commotion, emerged from her hut, her eyes widening at the sight of her daughter's condition. But as her mother tried to embrace her, Adanna pushed her away, anger and pain boiling over. "You," she screamed, her voice raw with emotion. "You did this to me. You pushed me into this nightmare, all for the sake of your own greed." Adanna poured out the horrors she had endured in Obiora's house, the dark rituals, the endless suffering. She spoke of the other wives, trapped in a cycle of misery and despair, all for Obiora's twisted desires. Her mother, confronted with the truth of her actions, fell to the ground, weeping with guilt and regret. "I thought I was giving you a better life," she sobbed, her voice broken. "I never meant for this to happen." Adanna's father, his own anger rising, turned on his wife. "You see what your selfishness has wrought?" he demanded, his voice shaking with fury. "Our daughter has suffered unimaginable horrors, all because of your blind ambition." As the family grappled with the weight of Adanna's revelations, her father revealed the plan he and Ikenna had set in motion, the magic that had brought about Obiora's downfall. "Rest now, my child," he said, his voice gentle and soothing. "We will go to Ikenna and bring the chief priest. Justice will be served, and you will be free from this nightmare once and for all." That morning, Adanna and her father went straight to Ikenna's master's shop, their hearts heavy with the weight of all that had transpired. Adanna, despite her exhaustion and the toll her pregnancy had taken on her body, insisted on accompanying her father, desperate to see Ikenna and to witness the end of her ordeal. As they walked, Adanna's steps were slow and labored, but her determination never wavered. She leaned on her father for support, drawing strength from his presence and the knowledge that she was no longer alone in her fight. When they arrived at the shop, they found Ikenna already there, his face etched with concern and anticipation. Upon seeing Adanna, he rushed forward, his arms outstretched to embrace her. Adanna, tears streaming down her face, collapsed into his arms, clinging to him as if he were her lifeline. "Ikenna," she sobbed, her voice raw with emotion. Thank you for never giving up on me, for fighting to bring me back from that nightmare." Ikenna held her close, his own tears mingling with hers. "Adanna, my love," he whispered, "I would have moved heaven and earth to save you. I'm just so sorry it took so long." As they stood there, lost in their reunion, Adanna's father and Ikenna discussed their next steps. They knew they needed to find the chief priest who had provided the magical substance to seek his guidance on how to proceed. Just as they were about to set out in search of the chief priest, he appeared before them, as if summoned by their very thoughts. His eyes, deep and knowing, fixed upon the group as he spoke. "I have foreseen this day," he said, his voice resonating with power, "and I know what must be done. You must go to Obiora's house, for the time of reckoning is at hand." Ikenna and Adanna's father nodded, their resolve strengthening with the chief priest's words. Together, with Adanna leaning on Ikenna for support, they set out towards Obiora's compound. As they approached the once forbidding gates of Obiora's house, they were surprised to find them wide open, unguarded and abandoned. A crowd had already gathered, drawn by the shocking news that had spread like wildfire through the village. Obiora, the wealthy and powerful man feared by all, had vomited a living snake before collapsing in agony. Among the crowd were the families of the women Obiora had taken as wives, their faces etched with a mix of anger, sorrow, and disbelief. They had come seeking answers, desperate to know the fate of their daughters who had been lost to them for so long. Whispers and murmurs rippled through the gathered throng as they caught sight of Adanna, her pregnant belly a testament to the horrors she had endured. Some pointed and stared, while others averted their eyes, shame and guilt written on their faces for the part they had played in her suffering. As the chief priest, Adanna, Ikenna, and Adanna's parents arrived at Obiora's compound, they were greeted by a shocking scene. Obiora lay on the ground, his body writhing in agony, barely clinging to life. The entire village had gathered, including the king of the community, all demanding answers for the shocking events that had transpired. The chief priest, his eyes blazing with righteous anger, stepped forward and pointed an accusing finger at Obiora. "This is the end of your reign of terror, Obiora," he declared, his voice booming across the compound. "Your dark rituals and evil deeds have finally caught up with you." The king, startled by the chief priest's bold proclamation, turned to him with a questioning gaze. "Who are you to make such accusations?" he demanded, his voice tinged with indignation. The chief priest fixed the king with a piercing stare, his words laced with contempt. "I am the one who sees the truth, the one who cannot be bought by Obiora's ill-gotten wealth. Unlike you, who turned a blind eye to the suffering of your own people, who dismissed the pleas of parents whose daughters were stolen away by this monster." The king's face flushed with shame as the chief priest's words hit home. He lowered his gaze, unable to meet the accusing eyes of the gathered villagers. Suddenly, the community's own priest emerged from the crowd, his face twisted with guilt and fear. The chief priest, upon seeing him, unleashed a torrent of fury. "And you," he shouted, pointing at the cowering figure, "you who were meant to be a guide and protector of our people, chose instead to be seduced by Obiora's bribes. You saw the evil he wrought and did nothing, allowing innocent lives to be destroyed for the sake of your own greed." The community priest fell to his knees, his body shaking with sobs as the weight of his sins bore down upon him. The villagers looked on, their faces etched with anger and disgust at the betrayal of those they had trusted to lead and protect them. The chief priest turned his attention back to Obiora, who lay gasping for breath on the ground. "Now, Obiora," he commanded, his voice cold and unyielding. "You will confess your crimes before the gods and the people you have wronged." Obiora, his eyes wide with fear, shook his head weakly, refusing to speak. The chief priest, his patience at an end, reached out and touched Obiora with a charm, a powerful talisman imbued with the fury of the gods. Obiora screamed in agony, his body convulsing as the charm's magic coursed through him. And then, in a voice choked with pain and despair, he began to confess. "I have committed great evil," he gasped, his words spilling out in a torrent of anguish. "I made a pact with dark powers, sacrificing the lives and happiness of innocent women for my own gain. I took them as my wives, but not out of love or compassion. I used them, subjecting them to unspeakable horrors, all to feed my own greed and lust for power." The gathered villagers listened in horror as Obiora's confession continued, each revelation more shocking than the last. He spoke of the dark rituals he performed, of the curse he had placed upon his wives, condemning them to an eternity of suffering. "They will never bear children," he cried, his voice filled with a twisted sort of glee. "They will remain pregnant forever, their bodies and souls trapped in a never-ending cycle of pain and despair. And when they die, their spirits will be bound to me, forever enslaved to my will." After speaking about the atrocities he committed and how he bought the hearts of the king and their community chief priest, Obiora's body convulsed one final time and then lay still. The village watched in stunned silence as the life drained from his eyes, his final breath a rattle of defeat. Adanna, clinging to Ikenna, felt a wave of emotions wash over her: relief, anger, sorrow, and a grim sense of justice. She knew that Obiora's death was only the beginning of her journey towards healing, but it was a crucial step in reclaiming the life that had been stolen from her. The chief priest, his face etched with a mix of satisfaction and sorrow, turned to address the king and the community priest. "Let this be a lesson to all who would abuse their power and betray the trust of the people," he said, his voice heavy with the weight of his words. "The gods see all, and they will not allow such evil to go unpunished." As the villagers stood in shock, still reeling from Obiora's confession and subsequent death, a strange sight caught their attention. One by one, Obiora's other wives began to emerge from the compound, their faces etched with a mix of fear, pain, and desperate hope. The chief priest, his eyes filled with compassion, approached the women, holding out a small vial containing a mysterious substance. "Drink this," he said, his voice gentle but firm. "It will purge the evil that has taken root within you and grant you the freedom you have been denied for so long." Adanna, her hand trembling, accepted the vial and brought it to her lips. The other wives followed suit, each of them swallowing the bitter liquid with a grimace. Suddenly, they began to convulse, their bodies racked with pain as they fell to the ground, retching and heaving. The villagers, terrified by the sight, began to flee, their screams of fear piercing the air. But the chief priest, his voice rising above the chaos, called out to them. "Do not run," he commanded, his eyes blazing with a fierce determination. "The evil that once held sway over these women has been broken. The creatures they birth now are but remnants, shadows of a power that has been forever destroyed." As the chief priest spoke, the women began to give birth, their cries of agony mingling with the gasps of horror from the onlookers. But instead of human children, they brought forth writhing, hissing pythons, the very embodiment of the dark magic that had enslaved them. The snakes, once born, began to vanish, their forms dissipating like mist in the morning sun. And as they disappeared, the women began to change, their bodies growing stronger, their eyes clearer, as if a great weight had been lifted from their souls. One by one, they stood, their voices trembling as they spoke of the horrors they had endured. "Obiora never laid with us as a husband should," they said, their words a damning indictment of the man who had stolen their lives. "And yet we found ourselves with child, our bodies betraying us, even as our minds screamed in terror and revulsion." As the women spoke, Obiora's compound began to burn, the flames consuming the very walls that had once held them prisoner. The villagers watched in stunned silence as the fire raged, a purifying force that seemed to cleanse the very earth of the evil that had taken root there. The king and the community priest, their heads bowed in shame, could not meet the accusing eyes of the villagers. The chief priest, his voice heavy with contempt, turned to them. "You have betrayed your people," he said, his words a damning judgment. "You have allowed greed and corruption to blind you to the suffering of the innocent. For this, you must pay." The villagers, their anger rising like a tidal wave, demanded justice. They called for the king and the community priest to be stripped of their titles and banished from the land, their names forever stained with the shame of their actions. Adanna, her face a mask of guilt and regret, fell to her knees before her husband, her voice choked with tears. "Please," she begged, her hands clasped in supplication, "forgive me. I thought I was doing what was best for our daughter, but I see now that I was blinded by my own greed and ambition. I have brought nothing but pain and suffering to our family." Namdi, his face a mix of anger and sorrow, looked down at his wife, his heart heavy with the weight of her betrayal. "You have destroyed our family," he said, his voice raw with emotion. "You have sacrificed our daughter's happiness for the sake of your own selfish desires. How can I ever trust you again?" Adanna and Ikenna, their hearts breaking at the sight of Adanna's parents' anguish, knelt beside Adanna, their voices joined in a plea for forgiveness. "Please, Father," Adanna said, her eyes filled with tears. "I know Mother has made mistakes, but she is still my mother and I love her. Can you not find it in your heart to forgive her for the sake of our family?" Namdi, his resolve crumbling under the weight of his children's pleas, looked down at his wife, his eyes softening. "I will forgive you," he said, his voice heavy with emotion. "But I cannot forget the pain you have caused. We will have to work hard to rebuild the trust that has been broken between us." Adanna, her heart filled with a mixture of relief and sorrow, nodded her head, her tears falling freely. "I will do whatever it takes," she promised, her voice trembling with sincerity. "I will spend the rest of my days making amends for the wrongs I have done." As the villagers looked on, their hearts heavy with the weight of all that had transpired, they knew that the road ahead would be long and difficult. But with the evil that had once held sway over their village finally vanquished, they could begin to hope for a brighter future, a future built on the foundations of love, trust, and the unbreakable bonds of family. As the sun rose on a new day, the village of Umuocha found itself enveloped in a sense of peace and tranquility that had been absent for far too long. The horrors of the previous day, the dark secrets that had been dragged into the light, seemed to have dissipated like a bad dream, leaving behind a community ready to heal and rebuild. The elders and youth leaders of the village gathered in the palace, their faces somber yet filled with a newfound sense of purpose. They spoke in hushed tones, their words carrying the weight of the decisions that lay ahead. "We cannot let the events of yesterday define us," one elder said, his voice firm with conviction. "We must choose a leader who embodies the values we hold dear, a leader who has proven himself through acts of bravery and selflessness." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd, and a name began to emerge, spoken with increasing fervor and admiration. "Ikenna," they whispered, their eyes shining with hope. "Ikenna should be our king." The young man in question stood at the back of the room, his heart racing as he listened to the words of his fellow villagers. He had never sought power or glory, only the chance to do what was right and to protect those he loved. As the elders and youth leaders turned to him, their faces expectant, Ikenna stepped forward, his voice trembling with emotion. "I am honored by your trust," he said, his eyes scanning the faces of those who had placed their faith in him. "I will do everything in my power to lead our village with integrity, compassion, and strength. Together, we will build a future that we can all be proud of." The villagers erupted in cheers, their voices rising in a chorus of joy and celebration. They marched to Ikenna's house, their feet pounding the earth in a rhythmic beat, their hearts filled with the promise of a brighter tomorrow. But as they reached Ikenna's home, they were met with a sight that none of them could have predicted. There, standing hand in hand, were Ikenna and Adanna, their faces radiant with love and happiness. The villagers watched in stunned silence as Ikenna turned to Adanna, his voice soft with emotion. "Adanna," he said, his eyes locked on hers, "I have loved you from the moment I first saw you. I know that we have faced many challenges and obstacles, but through it all, my love for you has never wavered. Will you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" Adanna, her eyes filled with tears of joy, nodded her head, her voice choked with emotion. "Yes," she whispered, her heart bursting with happiness. "Yes, I will marry you, Ikenna. I have always loved you, and I always will." As the villagers looked on, their hearts filled with a mixture of surprise and delight, Ikenna and Adanna embraced, their love for each other shining like a beacon of hope in the darkness. And then, in a moment that would be remembered for generations to come, Ikenna turned to Adanna, his voice filled with compassion and forgiveness. "Mother," he said, his hand outstretched in a gesture of reconciliation, "I know that you have made mistakes, but I also know that you love your daughter deeply. I forgive you, and I welcome you into our family with an open heart." Adanna, her face streaked with tears of gratitude and relief, fell to her knees before Ikenna, her voice trembling with emotion. "Thank you," she whispered, her heart filled with a love and respect she had never known before. "Thank you for your kindness and your forgiveness. I promise to be a better mother, a better person, from this day forward." As the villagers watched, their hearts filled with a sense of awe and wonder, Ikenna and Adanna stood together, their hands clasped, their eyes shining with the promise of a future filled with love and happiness. They knew that the road ahead would not be easy, that there would be challenges and obstacles to overcome, but they also knew that they had each other, and that together they could face anything. And so, as the sun began to set on that momentous day, the village of Umuocha celebrated the coronation of their new king and the marriage of two hearts that had found each other against all odds. They danced and sang, their voices rising in a joyous chorus, their hearts filled with the knowledge that no matter what the future might bring, they would face it together, as one united community. This captivating story teaches us valuable lessons about staying true to ourselves, the power of love, forgiveness, and the consequences of greed and abuse of power. Adanna and Ikenna's story reminds us that even in the darkest of times, hope and love can prevail, and that by standing together as a community, we can overcome great adversity. Through their journey, we learn the importance of living a life guided by integrity, kindness, and respect for others. We are reminded that we have the power to shape our own destiny and to choose love over hate. As you navigate the complexities of your own life, I encourage you to take these lessons to heart and apply them to your own experiences. And if you found this story as inspiring as I did, I invite you to subscribe to our channel, where we will continue to bring you more powerful and uplifting African tales like this one. Together, let us celebrate the richness and wisdom of our cultural heritage and use these stories as a guide to lead more meaningful and fulfilling lives. Thank you for joining me on this journey, and until next time, stay blessed and stay inspired.